She was losing him. Tessa Cole pressed both hands into the wound on Commander Harlan Voss's chest and felt the warmth spreading through her fingers. Not a slow seep, a pour, the kind of bleed that doesn't negotiate. Around her, the night was coming apart, rifle fire, cracking through the dark boots, striking frozen ground voices, cutting through the trees in sharp fragments. But in the small circle of space between her knees and his sternum, time moved differently. She counted his breaths. Uneven, the right side laboring. Her jaw tightened. "Sir." Her voice was level, not calm the way someone is calm when nothing is wrong, calm the way a person is calm when they have decided that panic is a resource they cannot spend. "Breathe with me. In for 4. Hold. Out slow." Voss looked up at her. His eyes were dark and working hard to find something to fix on. They found her face, 118 pounds, 26 years old. The woman he had looked at 3 days ago and almost sent home. "Don't stop talking," he said. The words came out rough, stripped down to their weight. "I'm not going anywhere, sir." She shifted her left hand, redistributed pressure with her forearm where grip was insufficient. Her right hand was already moving, not searching, moving with the certainty of someone who had done this in the dark before. "4 minutes. Stay with me." He didn't answer. She took that as a yes. Freeze. To understand how Commander Harlan Voss, 30 years in naval special warfare, a man who had stood in places that don't appear on public maps and made decisions that will never be declassified, ended up on his back in the dark, with this woman's hands holding his life together. You have to go back. 72 hours. To a gray morning in April of 2024, when a mission that looked straightforward on paper began with one question, delivered with a smirk that none of them would ever entirely forget. The briefing room smelled like old coffee and cold equipment. Harlan Voss stood at the head of the table and looked like a man who had never stopped being a SEAL, only stopped being paid for it. 58 years old. 6 feet of compacted experience with hands that were wider than they looked and eyes that processed a room, the way a pilot processes instruments continuously, automatically, without being asked to. He had read the file before he agreed to come back. He said yes anyway because watching from a distance was not something he was built for, and because the situation demanded people who had been through situations before. The mission parameters were clean on paper. A well-armed group moving dangerous equipment through the northern border corridor, 96 hours before the window closed, and the equipment disappeared into channels that would take years to untangle. 6-person team, no official footprint, handle it and walk away. Clean on paper. He had been doing this long enough to know that nothing stays clean. 3 years ago, on a stretcher, 40 meters from a landing zone, he had watched a man die in a way that a different decision might have prevented. Corporal James Merritt, 24 years old, father of a daughter who had been 3 weeks old when he deployed. The corpsman attached to that operation had made a call that looked reasonable in a manual and was catastrophic in the dark, and Voss had carried that gap in his judgment, his own failure to properly evaluate the corpsman beforehand, in the way he carried most failures, which was quietly and continuously, and in a place that informed everything without announcing itself. Since that night, he had not assigned a corpsman to a Tier 1 operation. He had told himself it was a policy decision. It was not a policy decision. It was a man putting a wall between himself and a specific kind of loss, which is a very human thing to do and is often very wrong. Until Washington made the correction for him. He looked at the personnel file one more time. Tessa Cole, age 26, 5 feet 4, 118 pounds. Navy Corpsman IDC certified. 3 years operational deployment. Assigned. He read the numbers again, not because he had forgotten them, because he was trying to find something in them that would settle the thing that wasn't settled. He closed the file. The team arrived through the morning. Mitch Kowalski came first, which was always the case with Kowalski early to everything, not from eagerness, but from the conviction that whoever arrived first controlled the room. 44 years old, former Marine Force recon, built by someone who prioritized durability. A scar along his left jaw that he had stopped explaining decades ago, and opinions about everything that he expressed, whether or not anyone had asked. He dropped his gear bag with the thud of a man who had carried heavy things so long he no longer registered their weight. Chief Everett Dawes came next. 52, former SEAL Master Chief. The kind of quiet that comes not from having nothing to say, but from having learned which things are worth saying. He read the room when he entered one unhurried sweep, then found a corner and occupied it with the stillness of a man who had learned how to wait without going somewhere else in his head. Corporal Garrett Finch arrived with energy and not enough gray in his hair. 27, quick to grin, still carrying the electricity of someone who had not yet fully learned how badly things can go. He was good in the field. Voss had verified that before agreeing to have him on this. The final seat was empty when Voss began the briefing. He was 10 minutes in terrain timeline entry points when he heard the door. She walked in without apology for the interruption, without the stiffness of someone trying to prove they belonged. Exactly as small as the numbers had suggested. The pack on her back was a Mystery Ranch SAT-LA rig that operators used not support personnel sitting on her frame with the settled look of something worn many times before. Dark hair tied back, no expression that invited comment. She found the empty chair and sat down and gave Voss her full attention. Kowalski was the first to speak. He looked at her the way he looked at most things, with the assessing gaze of a man who believed he could read anything in the world in under 10 seconds. He took in the pack, the frame, the face that offered nothing back. He arrived at his conclusion. "You're a SEAL medic." The way he said it was not a question. It was a verdict delivered as a question, the way certain men deliver things they have already decided. The smirk that followed was not cruel. It was the expression of someone who thought he knew the answer to everything in the room. Tessa looked at him. She did not look away. She let the silence build to the length she wanted it. Then she said, without heat and without performance, "Corpsman, IDC certified." Kowalski nodded the way men nod when an answer has confirmed what they already believed. He turned toward Finch with the half-turn of someone addressing a sympathetic audience. "They sent us somebody's kid's sister." Finch said nothing. He looked at the table. Tessa turned back to the briefing map. She didn't argue, didn't explain. She had learned early that the only answer to that kind of certainty was not words. The argument would be made another way in another language at a time of her choosing. In his corner, Chief Dawes had not moved, but his eyes had shifted. He watched the way she turned back to the map, not the turn of someone wounded, not suppressed anger. The turn of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. He had seen people move like that before, very few of them. He settled back and waited to see how long it took the others to understand what he already suspected. Voss watched all of it. He said nothing. He was collecting information, how she handled the opening, what she did with hostility. She had not earned whether she argued or absorbed or collapsed. He needed to know what she was made of, and this was one way to find out. What she did was nothing, and nothing in this context was everything. The first night of movement told Voss two things. It told him his team moved well together, which he already knew, the coordinated silence that develops between people who have spent real time in real places built on the small language of trust. And it told him his corpsman was watching everything. Not the way an observer watches. She tracked the way a person trained to anticipate tracks patterns, not scenes. The tree line, the team, back to the tree line. She monitored Finch's breathing from 12 feet away in the dark. She clocked the subtle self-correction in Kowalski's carry when his shoulder bothered him. She saw everything and said nothing about any of it. At the 2-hour mark, she came up beside Finch without ceremony. "Stop," she said quietly. "Turn around." Finch turned. She had her kit open before he had fully stopped moving, flashlight held low. She checked his eyes, his pulse, made a decision and moved on it. IV fluids, electrolytes, a specific redistribution of his pack up to weight that took 90 seconds to execute. The whole process cost 4 minutes. Finch didn't fully understand what had happened. He felt better. He started moving again. Voss watched from 8 feet away and said nothing. Behind him, he heard Kowalski mutter something low. He didn't catch the words. He didn't need to. What Finch would understand later, much later, when he had the full picture, was that those 4 minutes had kept him functional through the following 48 hours. That without the intervention, he would have gone down in the field at the worst possible moment. He would say, when asked, that she had looked at him like she was reading something she had read many times before. Like what he thought he was hiding was written in a language she had been fluent in for years. He would say she saved his life that night, without a shot fired, in the dark, in 4 minutes. He would say it like he was still a little surprised. The second demonstration came the following morning, and it came for Kowalski, which made it matter differently. He was running equipment checks when Tessa watched him reach across his body with his right hand. A small movement, something no one else would have flagged. She flagged it. "Your left shoulder," she said. "How long?" Kowalski looked at her. His expression moved through several stages. Irritation, suspicion, and underneath them, the wariness of a man whose hiding has just been told it's over. "What about it?" "You've been compensating for 6-7 years. Rotator cuff post-surgical. The way you reached just now, your left shoulder stayed slightly behind and you corrected automatically. You don't even know you're doing it anymore." A pause. "Did someone brief you on my file?" "No." "And then how?" "Because I pay attention." She held his gaze with the patience of someone who doesn't need the argument to go her way. "Can I look at it?" He said nothing long enough that it functioned as permission. She worked quickly. She adjusted his sling configuration in a way that was invisible to anyone who didn't know what she was addressing, redistributed the load to drop pressure from the damaged joint without affecting his draw speed by more than a fraction of a second. One modification, specific, surgical in its precision. "That holds for 3 days of heavy movement," she said. "When this is done, you need a real assessment." Kowalski tested the draw twice. He said nothing. But that night, he did not say anything about kid sisters. Chief Dawes waited until the team was settled before approaching her. He had a way of timing conversations, so they happened in the spaces between other things not staged but placed. She was checking her kit by low light, moving through each component with the focus of someone who understands that equipment will tell you what you haven't done yet. Tourniquet, chest seal, IV kit, hemostatic gauze, needle decompression needle 14-gauge packaging untouched. And at the bottom her hand closed briefly around a small, smooth object on a length of paracord, a single .30 caliber round worn to a shine. She held it for a moment, then let it go. Dawes sat down nearby without pretext. "Your father was a lifer," he said. "Marine Force Recon, KEA, September 2013. He nodded once, the nod of recognition, not sympathy. "You watch ground the way field people watch ground," he said. "Not the classroom version. You track distance by eye. You check coverage before you check comfort. That doesn't come from a manual." She turned back to her kit. "He used to say attention is the first weapon. Everything else is just mechanics." Dawes sat with that for a moment. He was right. He stood without urgency. "Get some sleep. We move at 0200. He walked back toward the fire. In the quiet after he left, Tessa held a piece of equipment without seeing it. She was seeing something else. A wide-open field in Montana. A rifle that was too heavy for a 10-year-old girl. A voice behind her patient, certain that said, "Don't grip it. Let it be part of you." She set the equipment down, picked up the next piece, kept moving. The intelligence update came at 0130, and it was bad in the specific way that field intelligence is bad when it's accurate, not wrong, just worse than before. The target group had accelerated. The handoff was now 8 hours earlier than projected. The original plan was obsolete. Voss assembled the team in the dark with 2 words and laid out the adjusted approach in under 4 minutes. New insertion harder ground on, less cover 2 hours shaved from the timeline. He watched the team absorb it with the faces of people who had absorbed bad news before. Then he looked at Tessa. She met his gaze with the same quality of attention she had held since walking in the door. No alarm visible. The even considered presence of someone who had already accepted that things would not go as planned. "Cole, rear of formation. Keep them alive." "Yes, sir." She turned back to her kit. Not to check it, she had checked it 3 hours ago and knew exactly what was in it. She picked up the paracord with the bullet and closed her fingers around it once. Briefly. The promise she had made to her mother was 11 years old. She had held it through basic training, through 3 years of field medicine, in places where holding it had cost something. She had tended enough gunshot wounds to understand what they do. She had been close enough to firefights to understand the acoustics of incoming fire. She had never lifted a weapon in combat. She put the bullet back, zipped the kit, picked up her pack, fell into formation. In the dark ahead, the team moved through the trees in silence, 5 figures in graduated shades of night, moving toward a valley none of them had seen in daylight. She watched Voss at the front, moving with the economy of someone who had spent 3 decades learning not to waste motion. She had seen the recalibration in him after Kowalski's shoulder, after Finch on the trail, the small internal revision of a man whose information has changed and who has followed it not completely, but enough to mean something. It was not approval. It was the beginning of something that could become it. She moved through the dark and kept her breathing even, and watched the ground and the trees and the ridge lines in the rotating pattern her father had built into her so early it had become involuntary. The trees thinned, the valley opened below them, vast and uncommitted. Somewhere in its shadow a clock was running. The valley did not announce itself. It simply arrived, the ridge lines pulling back the structure, sitting low against the earth below, dark windowed, surrounded by vehicles that had not been there. In the satellite imagery from 36 hours ago, more vehicles than the intelligence had promised. Voss raised a closed fist and the column stopped. He brought his binoculars up and held them for a long moment. Then he lowered them and turned to Dawes with the compressed expression of men who have a private vocabulary. Dawes took the binoculars, looked, handed them back. Tessa was third in the column. She couldn't see the structure clearly, but she could read the stillness of the men ahead of her, and what she read was not good. She moved her gaze to the high ground on both sides, slow, methodical, and she found the ridge to the east, the way she found things like it since childhood. Not by looking for it, by understanding where it had to be. The ridge was there, dark, elevated. A natural firing position with coverage of the entire valley floor. She looked at it for a long time. Voss briefed the team in a voice just above silence. 14 people minimum inside or around the structure. The handoff was happening now ahead of schedule, and the East Ridge was occupied, one man prone his equipment, making a shape against the sky that was unmistakable to people trained to see it. Kowalski had his rifle up before Voss finished speaking. He checked through the scope with the focus of someone who has acquired something real. Then he made a sound, not a word. He lowered the weapon and held his right hand flat in front of him. It was shaking. Not much. Not in a way that would matter to most tasks, but at the distance required that tremor meant a miss. A miss meant a sound. A sound meant they were finished before they started. Voss looked at the hand, looked at Kowalski. A decision moved across his face, fast, invisible, and gone. He turned. His eyes found Tessa in the dark. There are moments that are not decisions in the conventional sense. They are not chosen from a menu. They are the place where preparation meets an absence of alternatives, and the body moves because it understands what the mind is still processing. Tessa was already looking at the Barrett. It lay on its bipod beside Kowalski, 30 pounds of precision instrument. 50 caliber capable of accurate fire at distances that feel like abstraction until you are behind the glass and the distance compresses into geometry and the space between heartbeats. 840 meters to the ridge. She had calculated it twice without being asked. Kowalski saw where she was looking. He started to speak. She was already moving. Cole. Voss said her name with weight that meant several things at once. It meant stop. It meant, are you certain? It meant, I need to know if you understand what this is. She crouched beside the Barrett without touching it. Looked up at him. I know the distance, she said. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds in a situation like this is enough time to be wrong about something. He had been wrong about something before. He carried it every day. He nodded. She settled behind the rifle. The Barrett was configured for Kowalski's stock-length cheek weld, adjusted for a man considerably larger than her. She made the adjustments without rushing. Bipod into the earth. Stock pulled in, left hand on the forend, right on the grip. She found the scope. The world at 840 meters came through 22 millimeters of glass, dark, and still the man on the ridge exactly where she expected him. She breathed, her father's voice, not a memory, a structure. Something built into her so early it had become load-bearing. In for 4. Hold. Out slow and give the shot to the space between beats. She read the wind. This was the part that could not be hurried. Wind at altitude behaves differently from wind at ground level, and she watched the far tree line and the grass at mid-range and built a picture of what the air between her and the target was doing at this exact moment. It was doing something she hadn't fully accounted for. A shift. Small, coming from the north with a westward component. 3 miles per hour, maybe 4. At 840 meters, that was not a footnote. She adjusted, found the position again, breathed, she squeezed. The Barrett fired and the sound was immense, not just heard but felt a percussion that moved through the chest and the back of the eye simultaneously. She watched through the scope. The shot hit 2 inches left of center. A miss. Not the miss of someone who doesn't know what they're doing. A miss made by physics. The wind had shifted in the exact moment the bullet left the muzzle, a gap of 0.2 of a second that was no one's fault and entirely unforgiving. But the man on the ridge was already moving, rolling into a lower position, and now he knew a shooter was out there. 25 seconds, maybe fewer. The team had not moved. She felt them, their held breath quality, 5 people who had put everything on a single moment that had not gone as planned. She did not look at any of them. She reacquired. The wind had settled. She felt the change before she could name it, the way a room's pressure shifts before you identify what shifted. She rebuilt the picture. The target was lower now, less exposed, but still on the ridge, still findable. She counted the beats. Heartbeats, not clock beats. Her pulse had dropped without her asking it to, down through the work of her breathing, down into the zone where her father had told her once that the world stops moving so fast. He called it the still point. She had never used that phrase to anyone else. She found it now. Second squeeze. The Barrett fired. Through the scope, the rifle on the ridge went still. The silhouette did not move again. 840 meters. 3 seconds of absolute silence from the team behind her. Then Kowalski said something low that was not a word in any language but was entirely understandable. Tessa held position. She ran one more pass along the ridge, checked the flanking positions on both sides, confirmed nothing else was moving. Then she came up off the bipod and sat back on her heels. Her hands were steady. She stood, picked up her medical kit, which she had set beside the Barrett with the automatic priority of someone who knows the order of their tools. Moved to Voss without being directed. Let me see your shoulder. He had hit the ground hard when the first shot fired. She had seen the impact, the way his left side had taken the landing. He started to say it was nothing. She was already checking. Deep abrasion, 2 ribs, probably cracked, nothing structural. She worked in silence. He let her, which itself was something. When she finished, he looked at her with the expression of a man holding more than one thing in his mind and finding it difficult to put them in order. Where did you learn to do that? He didn't mean the ribs. My father taught me, she said. Started when I was 10. She picked up her kit. We still have a structure to address, sir. He turned back to the objective. Behind them, Kowalski had retrieved the Barrett. He was looking at it in a way that was not quite how he had looked at it before. They held position until the activity around the structure reached a natural pause the moment an exchange is concluding and parties begin considering exits. Voss read it through the binoculars and signaled the team to move. The descent took 11 minutes of deliberate silence, each footfall placed with the care of someone who understood that the wrong sound would collapse the architecture of the night. Tessa moved at the rear, watching the high ground on both sides clearing positions as they fell behind. The work at the structure was fast and professional. Afterward, in the unwinding quiet that follows resolved emergency, Finch sat against the outside wall and put his head back and closed his eyes. He opened them when she sat down nearby. She wasn't checking her kit. She was looking at the sky above the tree line, the dark beginning to thin at its edges where morning was building itself from the bottom up. You're not going to say anything, he said. Not a question. About what? The shot. She was quiet for a moment. I missed the first one. He looked at her. You hit the second one at 840 meters in the dark with a rifle that wasn't set up for you. That's what the job required. He watched her for a long moment. The woman they had laughed at on the first day. He tried to remember clearly what he had thought when he first saw her, and found that the memory already felt like it belonged to a different version of himself, the version that had not yet seen what the last 24 hours had shown him. Garrett, he said, introducing himself properly for the first time. She looked at him briefly. I know. He almost smiled. Right. She looked back at the sky, and the silence between them was the kind that doesn't need filling. Later that night, in a sheltered position 3 kilometers from the objective, Voss sat beside Tessa in the low light of a single chem stick and did something he had not done in 3 years, began a conversation that was not about the mission. He did it directly. How old were you? She knew immediately. 15, September 2013. He sat with that. Outside, wind moved through the pines in long, slow passes. I told you about Merritt, he said. What I didn't tell you is that the corpsman on that operation wasn't incompetent. He was undertrained for what the situation required. That was my failure. I approved his assignment without pushing hard enough on the evaluation. He paused. I built a wall after that, decided I wouldn't embed a corpsman in Tier 1 work again. I told myself it was a policy decision. She waited. It wasn't a policy decision. It was me not wanting to trust someone again in that specific way. And I brought it here. Put it on you. He looked at the wall. That wasn't fair. I understand why you did it, she said. That doesn't make it right. No, but it makes it human. He was quiet for a moment. Then, tell me about the first time he took you out. She held the question for a long moment. Then she answered it. Montana, I was 10. February ice still on everything, but the snow had pulled back enough to see ground in places. He woke me at 5 in the morning, and I thought we were going fishing. He had a rifle case in the back of the truck, and I remember thinking it was too heavy to be a fishing rod. She paused. He set it all up without explaining it first. He wanted me to see it assembled before he told me what it was. Then he sat behind it, sighted through the scope, and handed it to me without warning. He said, don't grip it. Grip means you're trying to control it. Let it be part of you. If it's part of you, you don't have to control it. That's not standard instruction. He wasn't a standard instructor. She looked at her hands. He came back when he could. Every Saturday morning he was home. Rain cold didn't matter. We were out before anyone else was awake. Not just mechanics. Patience. The way to wait without going somewhere else in your head. She was quiet for a moment. And then he was gone. September 2013. My mother asked me one thing afterward. She didn't ask me not to enlist. She knew I would. She asked me one thing, only don't pick up a gun to kill someone. She said, I don't care if you serve, I just can't lose you the way I lost him. She stopped. And tonight, Voss said, tonight I broke that promise. No evasion, no softening. I know why I did it. I would do it again. But she doesn't know that yet, and she should. The chemlight, the wind, the dark shapes of trees. Voss looked at her with something that was not pity. Pity would have been wrong entirely. It was recognition, the expression of someone who has carried things a long time and can identify the specific posture of someone else doing the same. When this is done, he said, you call her. Tessa said nothing. That's not a suggestion. A long pause. Yes, sir, she said. The second intelligence update came at 0430, and it was worse. The group had not dispersed. A secondary element had linked up with the primary. The equipment was still moving now, headed toward a second exchange point 11 kilometers north. If it reached that point, the chain of custody would multiply, and the trail would take months to rebuild. 6 hours. Voss ran the numbers. The team was operating on compressed sleep and sustained adrenaline. His ribs were manageable but present. Kowalski's hand had steadied, but not completely. One shot available. A ridge to the north with a clear line to the exchange corridor, 1,180 meters. Kowalski looked at the number, looked at Tessa. The look on his face was not what it had been on the first day. No assessment, no dismissal. A plain question from one operator to another. Can you make it? She had been reading the ridge for several minutes. Wind at elevation versus mid-range versus ground. Temperature cold enough to affect muzzle velocity at this distance in ways that matter. The angle. She looked at her left hand. The cut from the previous night had been dressed properly, but it had depth. She made a slow fist, felt exactly where manageable became something else. She looked back at the ridge. Yes, she said. Kowalski handed her the Barrett without ceremony, which was its own kind of ceremony. The approach took 40 minutes through ground that didn't cooperate, loose shale, a creek crossing, cold enough to make her left hand seize for 10 seconds on the other side. She worked the fingers back into function while they moved, pressing the cut against her palm, knowing the difference between pain that limits and pain that informs. This was pain that informed. She found the position near the ridge crest a natural depression, offering both concealment and stability. She settled in, set the bipod, made the adjustments. Dawes was on her left, 12 feet back, watching the approach corridors. Voss was on her right, binoculars up. 7 minutes, he said. That was the window. 7 minutes before the vehicle turned north onto a road with no useful positions. She breathed. The wind here was organized, coming consistently from the northwest. She clocked it against a stand of thin pines at mid-range. Taller trees behind the target showed a slightly different movement, a cross-component she had to account for. At this distance, a mistaken wind reading was not measured in inches. Her left hand on the forend, the grip was wrong. She couldn't close it fully. She shifted, used the flat of her forearm against the bipod leg to add purchase. Unconventional. Effective. Her father had told her once that the long shot was not about confidence. Confidence was for people who needed to reassure themselves. The long shot was about acceptance. Accepting the distance, accepting the variables, accepting that you have done what can be done and the rest belongs to physics. Give it to the still point. Then let it go. She let it go. The Barrett fired. No miss this time. The exchange corridor was eliminated as a functional handoff point. She held position, swept the glass, confirmed, then came off the rifle and sat back. Her left hand was shaking slightly, sustained grip that cut the cold. She looked at it for a moment the way someone takes inventory, then moved on. Dawes came up beside her. He looked at her hand, looked at the distance, looked at the valley below. Your father teach you that one too? He taught me the patience part, she said. The rest is math. Dawes looked at the distance one more time. 1,100 meters isn't just math, he said quietly. She didn't answer. Finch appeared at her other shoulder and said nothing, and stood there in the cold morning air, with his shoulder 3 inches from hers, and that was its own language. She picked up the Barrett. They had 6 kilometers to cover before the extraction window opened. She stood. She started moving. The extraction route was a 6-kilometer line drawn through ground that did not cooperate. They moved north through the drainage corridor Voss had mapped before dawn. The team moved with the efficiency of people who had been through something together and come out the other side, less careful than the first night, more integrated, built on information only experience provides. Tessa was second from the rear. She moved and she watched. The cut in her left hand had soaked through the field, dressing a slow, persistent warmth she registered and filed. There was a hierarchy to these things, and her hand was lower on it than the 6 kilometers in the window. They were 2 kilometers from the extraction point when the night came undone. Not all at once. In sequence, each element triggering the next, moving faster than the ability to stop any single link. A sound from the eastern tree line low and displaced the kind of sound that is nothing until it is everything. Voss raised his fist and the column stopped. Then the firing started. 2 positions east and northeast, overlapping fields of fire calculated in advance by someone who had done this before. Not a probe, a sweep. They knew approximately where the team was. The team went to ground. Training takes over in these moments. The body moves to cover before the mind has finished the sentence. Tessa was behind a low rock formation kit pressed to her chest, running her assessment, her own body first, then the team. She was intact. She lifted her head and swept the column. Finch was behind a fallen tree, returning controlled fire. Kowalski was repositioning north through the drainage cut, developing a flanking angle. Dawes had gone east into the tree line. She couldn't see him, which meant he was where he was supposed to be. Voss. She found him at the front of the column behind a rock outcrop, and for 3 seconds, everything was organized and manageable. Then a third position opened from the north, a cutoff element, positioned ahead of where the team had been heading. This had been designed to move them and then stop them, and it had worked. Voss pushed out from behind the outcrop to develop a sightline to the northern position, and he was 3 steps into the open ground when the shot hit him. She heard it before she understood it. The sound a body makes, absorbing that impact, compact, specific, carrying weight. She was moving before she had processed the sequence. Low fast, using the terrain the way she had been taught. She reached him. He was on his back, hands pressing at his right side. His face was controlled, the face of a man taking inventory, which is more alarming than panic because it means he knows what he's dealing with. She pulled his hands away. She needed to see. Entry below the right clavicle, high on the chest wall. Exit had taken something with it. She felt the physics without seeing everything, breathing, asymmetric, deeper left. Then right, the right side laboring to expand. Hemothorax, blood accumulating in the pleural space, compressing the lung from outside, beginning a process that would reach critical threshold in under 6 minutes. 6 minutes, she began. What is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not done it is the quality of mind required to perform precise medical intervention while the environment is actively trying to kill you. It is not bravery in the conventional sense. Bravery implies managing fear, a threshold being crossed. What Tessa operated in was a different thing, a narrowing, a reduction of the available world to its essential components. The patient, the kit, the procedure, and whatever tools were still functioning. Her left hand was compromised. She worked around it, automatically redistributing demands between her hands, her forearm, the angle of her body when grip was insufficient. She opened the chest seal kit, found the needle, found the space between the ribs, second intercostal mid-clavicular line, right side by touch because the light was wrong, and the time available did not permit the luxury of adequate illumination. The needle went in. The sound of air releasing from a sealed space is small and specific. In this moment, it was the most important sound she had heard all night. Around her, the firefight continued. She was aware of it the way a surgeon is aware of noise from the hallway, registered, processed, deprioritized. She tracked Finch to her left by the rhythm of his weapon. She heard the fire from the east shift slightly, which told her something about repositioning. The northern position had gone quieter. Dawes had addressed something. What she knew was that Harlan Voss needed a chest seal in the next 40 seconds, and she had to place it without full use of her left hand, and he was watching her face with the focused attention of a man using another person's expression to gauge the severity of his own condition. She kept her face flat, informative without alarming. The face she had practiced without knowing she was practicing it every time she had sat with someone who needed to understand that what was happening was serious without losing the thing that keeps people fighting. Breathe with me. In for 4. He breathed. She placed the seal. Then she heard it movement from the east, closer than it should have been. Not Kowalski's movement, which she had cataloged by sound. Closer, faster, someone advancing under cover. Finch heard it. She knew because his fire tightened from area suppression to targeted response. He was 40 feet left and couldn't fully cover the eastern approach from his angle without leaving a gap. Her right hand was on the chest seal. Her left hand reached. It found her sig. She drew left-handed, wrong hand, the cut making the grip unstable, and fired twice toward the eastern approach. Not aimed fire in the clinical sense. Displacement fire. Enough to make a moving person recalculate enough to give Finch the 2 seconds he needed to reorient. She heard him cover the gap. She put the SIG back and used both hands for the seal again. Almost done, she said to Voss. He was looking at her. He had not looked away. And in the darkness, with fire on both sides and her compromised hand and his blood in the 6-minute window now closer to 3 minutes from its start, he was looking at her with an expression she would come back to later. Not in this moment, the moment was not available for reflection, but later in the quiet she would return to it. He was looking at her the way you look at something you were profoundly wrong about. The seal was placed. She ran her hands over the dressing twice, confirming the adhesion on all 4 sides. Checked his pulse present, elevated, organized. Checked the rise of both sides of his chest, not equal but improving. The right side expanding, again as the pressure released. He was going to make it. She pressed her SIG into his right hand and closed his fingers around it. Hold that, she said. Don't use it unless something gets to us directly. Your job right now is to breathe and stay still. He looked at the weapon in his hand, then at her. Cole, he said. His voice was rough. Breathe, sir. He breathed. She moved up to kneeling and found Finch across 40 feet of dark ground. She gave him a hand signal, 2 fingers east, then flat cover and hold. He turned back. From the northern tree line, Dawes appeared moving low and fast, the northern position cleared. He read the situation in 3 seconds and moved to fill the southeastern gap without being directed. The fire from the east continued for 4 more minutes and then stopped. Kowalski, from the flanking angle he had developed through the drainage, had addressed the eastern position in the specific and final way that such positions get addressed. The silence that followed was the silence of a problem that no longer existed. Tessa kept her hand on Voss's chest and counted his breaths and felt the slow improvement of his right side and did not move until she was certain it was real. When the perimeter was confirmed and the immediate threat resolved, Finch crossed the ground between them and sat down beside her. He looked at Voss, looked at the dressing, looked at her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The extraction helicopter arrived 19 minutes after Voss's signal, 12 minutes later than scheduled, and precisely on time for what had actually mattered. The flight medic was young and recently certified, and he listened to Tessa's handoff with the focus of someone receiving information he understood was better than anything he had been given in a classroom. She gave him the injury, the intervention, the current status, what to watch for each word, load-bearing, nothing wasted. When she finished, he looked at her for a moment. You did the needle decompression in the field. Yes. Under fire. There was some fire? Yes. He nodded slowly, not the nod of someone minimizing, the nod of someone recalibrating. They were loading Voss onto the litter when she heard his voice. Cole, she turned. He was propped on one elbow in the specific defiance of a man whose body has been told to stay down and has not agreed to comply. His color was what it was, the pale of someone who had lost significant blood and gotten some of it back. The flight medic had started to reach toward him and had stopped when Voss looked at him. He was looking at Tessa. I owe you the truth, he said, not quietly, in front of Kowalski 6 feet away, in front of Finch and Dawes, saying something in front of witnesses because the witnesses were part of the point. She walked over. Sir, the window bottom, 30 seconds. He held her gaze. I came into this operation with something that wasn't yours to carry. I made a decision about who you were before you walked in the door, not because of your record, because of what happened to James Merritt, and because I needed somewhere to put it, and I put it on you. He paused. That was wrong. The rotors were getting louder. What you did tonight, he stopped. Not from weakness, from the difficulty of a man who means something precisely and is working to say it precisely. What you did tonight is not something I have seen before. And I have seen a very great deal. He looked at her steadily. You asked me what your father would say. I'll tell you what I say. You belong here. You have always belonged here. Every man on this team knows it. Kowalski, without being asked, without ceremony, stood up straighter. Finch nodded once. Dawes said nothing, which from Dawes was the loudest possible agreement. The flight medic touched Voss's shoulder with the authority of someone who had waited long enough. Voss let himself be repositioned. He looked at the sky above the clearing, then back at Tessa one more time. Call your mother, he said, when this is done. The helicopter lifted. The sound of it expanded and then shrank, and the dark took it back. Tessa stood in the clearing and watched until there was nothing left to watch. Around her, the team stood in the aftermath of something that had cost what it cost. She did not speak. There are moments that do not require speech that are diminished by it, and this was one of them. After a while, Kowalski picked up his rifle. Secondary shelter, he said, 3 kilometers. He began to walk. The others followed. Tessa followed last, and as she walked, she was aware of the specific quality of the silence around her. Not the silence of before, not the silence of a team that had not yet decided what to make of the person at the rear of the column. A different silence. The silence of people who know who they are walking with. They reached a secondary shelter before first light, a federal land agency structure empty this time of year, its lock addressed by Dawes with the toolmen like Dawes always carried for locks like this. Inside 4 walls, a wood stove, the smell of disuse, and the specific luxury of a roof. Kowalski was the last one in. He set his rifle against the wall by the door and stood in the center of the room for a moment. The team gave it room, the quiet clearing of space that people make when they understand something is about to happen. He turned to Tessa. She was seated on the floor against the east wall, finally addressing her left hand with the full attention it had been waiting for. Threading a suture through a curved needle, right-handed, because it had to be her left hand, flat on her knee. Kowalski looked at the hand, looked at the needle, looked at the wall above her head for a moment. Then he looked at her directly. "Cole." She looked up. "I was wrong." He said it without preface, without the hedging architecture most people construct around an apology to protect themselves from its full weight. "From the minute you walked in the door, I was wrong, and I said things that weren't fair, and I'm saying so now in front of everybody because that's the way it should be said." Something moved in her expression, not forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness implies a debt, and she didn't frame things that way. Something closer to acknowledgement. Recognition that a true thing had been said, that the saying of it had cost something, and that the payment had been paid honestly. She nodded once. "Okay," she said. Kowalski nodded. He sat down against the opposite wall. The conversation was over. It was enough, the kind of enough that lasts. Dawes sat beside her and held the light at the angle she needed without being asked. She worked in the improved visibility with the unhurried precision of a professional dealing with a patient who happened to be herself. After a while, he said quietly, "You're going to call her." She placed the 4th suture. "Yes, sir." He held the light steady. Harlan Voss was out of surgery by early afternoon. The report came through the agreed channel in the careful language of people who deal in injury and recovery as daily business, clinical, not dramatic, which meant it was accurate. He was stable. The hemothorax had been managed effectively in the field. 4 to 6 weeks restricted activity. Full recovery expected. Tessa read it twice. The second time more slowly, checking each sentence against what she already knew from 30 minutes on the ground with her hands on his chest. It matched. She folded the paper, put it in her kit. 6 months passed. October 2024, Naval Amphibious Base, Coronado, California. The morning came in off the Pacific, the way it always came in at this time of year, gray and cool and honest about itself. The light, flat and diffuse, a morning that does not promise more than it intends to deliver. The base moved with its permanent, organized energy, the productive noise of a place whose reason for existing has not changed in decades and does not expect to. Tessa drove through the main gate at 06:45 and sat in the car for a moment before she got out. Not from hesitation. From habit, the brief pause before entering a space, the inventory of what she was carrying in and what she intended to do with it. She had gained back 6 of the 7 pounds she had lost. The circles under her eyes had reduced to the faint residual shadows of someone who slept well most nights. The scar on her left hand was visible, a clean line healed to white, running from the base of the ring finger toward the wrist. She had considered covering it in the early weeks. She had decided against it. It was part of the record, and she had no interest in editing the record. She got out and walked to the building. The classroom held 14 people. They sat in 2 rows and carried the specific mix of competence and incompleteness that characterizes people who are very good at part of their job and have not yet found the edges of their map. They ranged from 21 to 29. Some had been told who was teaching. Others knew only that the curriculum was new. In the 3rd row, second seat from the left, sat Ensign Colt Hargrove, 22. The jaw and posture of someone who had been told he was good at things for most of his life and had believed it at a rate that was not excessive but was not yet open to the possibility that the map of his capability had edges he hadn't reached. He was looking at Tessa with the expression of a young person looking at someone who does not match their expectation of authority. She had seen that expression before. She knew exactly what it meant and exactly what it would look like in 6 months. She walked to the front of the room. She stood without speaking for a moment, not for effect, but because she had learned that the first thing you do in a room tells the room what kind of room it's going to be. She wrote 4 words on the board. "Drag them out alive." She turned back. This program is called Integrated Combat Medicine. You will hear it referred to by its acronym. I use the full name because the full name says what it is. She looked at the 14 faces evenly. You were selected because you are already good at part of your job. Some of you are excellent at it. That is not enough. She paused. Because there will be a moment for most of you, more than one, when the person you need to keep alive is on one side of you and the thing trying to kill them is on the other. You will not be able to choose which hand to use. You will need both of them. No one spoke. You have been trained to heal. That training is essential and it is not complete. She looked at each face in turn, unhurried. Heal when you can, fight when you must. And when you have to do both at the same time, you do not run. You do not choose. You find the still point and you use both hands and you bring them home. Hargrove was watching her. His expression had shifted from its starting point. Not convinced, but listening. The distinction mattered more than the distinction between convinced and unconvinced. We start with the basics, she said. Not because you don't know them, because knowing them the way you know them now is different from knowing them under conditions that make knowing them very difficult. We are going to make knowing them very difficult. She opened the session and the room moved into it, and Hargrove in the third row was no longer wearing the expression of a young person looking at someone who doesn't match expectations. He was taking notes. After the session ended, as the others filed out, he approached her desk. He stood in front of it with the posture of someone who has rehearsed something and then abandoned the rehearsal. Ma'am, can I ask you something? She looked at him, waited. Is it true you made the 1,180-meter shot? He asked it directly without performance. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, working through something. I heard what Kowalski said. When you first came in, he looked at her with the expression of someone trying to reconcile a story with the person standing in front of him. You're a SEAL medic. The words landed differently from the first time they had been said to her. No smirk behind them, no verdict. A genuine question from someone who was beginning to understand that the categories he had been given did not contain what was standing in front of him. She looked at him for a moment. Corpsman, she said. The same answer she had given Kowalski in a different version of herself in a Montana briefing room that already felt like a long time ago. IDC certified. Hargrove nodded, not Kowalski's nod, the nod of someone who has been given the beginning of something and understands it's a beginning. Yes, ma'am, he said. He picked up his notebook and walked out. The ripple effects were not dramatic. They rarely are. The things that change the structure of a system rarely announce themselves as structural changes. They present as practical improvements, curricular adjustments, policy recommendations written in careful language by people who understand that the rooms where decisions get made sometimes need to be approached sideways. The VA offices in 3 states requested the integrated combat medicine curriculum be developed into training materials for veteran care facilities. Not because someone gave a speech, because a report was circulated which referenced an after-action analysis, which referenced a field operation in April 2024, in which a corpsman with dual capability training had performed medical intervention under sustained direct fire and achieved outcomes that the conventional model of role separation could not have achieved. The report used the language of policy. What it described was Tessa on frozen ground with her hands on Voss's chest. In Washington, Harlan Voss sat at a table full of people whose titles were longer than their patients and made the case for a structural redesignation of corpsman capability within Tier 1 operational support. He was 4 weeks out of restricted activity. He sat straight. He spoke plainly. He cited one case study. He cited it by name. He had told her he was going to the week before in a 7-minute phone call because neither of them was built for long phone calls. She had said yes, which and meant it simply, and they had moved on. The committee asked questions. He answered them. Some contained their skepticism as a structural feature, and he answered those the same way he answered the others, with the facts without decoration, not asking them to believe in anything. Presenting what had happened and letting what had happened carry the argument. It carried it. She called her mother on a Tuesday evening in October. Sitting on the small concrete step outside her quarters, facing west toward the Pacific, which was doing what the Pacific does in the evening, darkening from gray to a blue, with purple in it, the horizon pulling away the sound of it, consistent and indifferent, and somehow exactly right. She had been composing this call for 6 months, not in writing, in the way you compose something you need to say, returning to it, revising it in the back of your mind, setting it down and coming back. Never quite finishing it, because finishing it meant making it real in a way that the carrying of it didn't. She dialed. Her mother answered on the second ring. Tessa. Not a question. Her mother had always known when it was her, some frequency of presence that transmitted before the voice. Mom, she looked at the Pacific. I need to tell you something. Okay, simply. The okay of a woman who had been waiting for phone calls she was afraid of for most of her adult life and had learned to receive them standing up. Tessa told her. She started at the beginning, the call to duty. The team, the valley, the Barrett on the ground in the dark. The weight of it, the distance, the decision that happened in the space between Kowalski's shaking hand and the man on the ridge who had 30 seconds before changing everything. She said it directly. I broke the promise, and I knew I was breaking it, and I would break it again. Then she told her about Voss on the ground. The 6 minutes, the needle, the cig in her left hand while her right held the seal. What it had felt like to do both things at the same time, not fearlessness. She wanted her mother to understand it was not fearlessness, but something closer to what her father had described once in a field in February when she was 12 years old. The still point. The place where the variables resolve and you give the outcome to physics and you trust what you have built. When she finished, her mother was quiet for a long time. The Pacific moved below in the dark. He taught you well, her mother said. Steady, the steadiness of a woman who has had a long time to come to terms with the dimensions of a grief and has not finished the process but has learned to live alongside it. He did. You know what he would say? I know. Say it out loud anyway. Tessa looked at the horizon. He'd say I did right. He'd say exactly that. A pause. And so do I. The Pacific. The evening, 6 months of carrying something that was now not lighter exactly, but shared. Mom, she said. I know, her mother said. I know. They stayed on the line after that, not talking much, which was its own conversation. The kind only possible with someone who has known you since before you had a self to present to the world. They talked about small things, the weather in Montana, the condition of the truck her father had left a book her mother was reading. Normal things, the things that exist on both sides of the extraordinary. When she hung up, she sat on the step in the dark for a while longer. She thought about her father. Not about the field, not about the rifle, not about September 2013. She thought about the drives to the field in February, cold inside the truck cab, the heater making the sound of something working without working well, his hands on the steering wheel. How large they had seemed when she was 10, and how she had understood years later that they were not particularly large. They were just her father's hands, and she had measured everything against them. She went inside. The briefing was on her desk when she arrived the next morning. A single sheet in standard format, the logistics and timelines and personnel requirements of a new operation. She read it at 07:53, standing at her desk with her coffee going cold at the corner. At the bottom in the section for team configuration, the roles were listed one by one. Position 1 Commander, Harlan Voss. Position 2 Integrated Medical Support, Tessa Cole. She read the line twice. She set the briefing down. She looked out the window at the base in the October morning, the organized movement of a place that exists to send people toward things that require sending the Pacific behind everything, the flat light that does not promise what it does not intend to deliver. She picked up her kit. She checked it the way she always checked it, not from doubt, not from anxiety, but because the checking was its own kind of answer to every question about readiness, not a list of items, a ritual. The way a person says in the language of repeated action, I have prepared. I am prepared. I will be prepared. She zipped it. She stood. She walked out the door. Outside, the base moved around her with its permanent organized purpose, boots on pavement, voices carrying instructions across open ground, the sound of people moving toward things that require moving toward. Tessa walked through the morning without hurry, her kit over one shoulder, her left hand with its small white scar visible in the October light. In the classroom behind her, Colt Hargrove was already at his desk. He had arrived early, which was new. He had his notebook open to the first page of the first session, and at the top of the page, he had written 4 words and underlined them. Drag them out alive. He was thinking about what they meant. He was starting to understand. Down at the waterfront, the Pacific moved the way it always moved, without interest in what was happening. Above it, without preference for outcome, consistent and vast and indifferent to the difference between one morning and the next. But mornings are not the same as each other, even when the ocean is the same. Some mornings are the continuation of what came before. Some mornings are the beginning of what comes next. Tessa Cole walked into the morning, and she knew which kind this was. Her father had told her once, the last time she saw him before the deployment, that did not bring him back standing in the driveway in the cold, his hand on the roof of the truck. He had told her that the most important thing a person can do is learn what their hands are for. She had spent 16 years learning. She knew now, both of them, everything they could hold, everything they could heal, and everything they could protect, and the still point between one thing and the other, the place where a person stops being two things and becomes one thing whole without apology ready. Her pack was on her shoulder, the briefing was in her kit, the Pacific was behind her and the base was ahead of her, and somewhere in the northwest, a new set of coordinates was waiting to be read. She walked forward, steady, both hands.